Welcome to a world of secrets and mysteries, where history intertwines with mysticism. Today, we will embark on a journey through the dark pages of the past to uncover one of the most mysterious chapters of the 20th century. We will discuss how ancient symbols and occult practices became the basis for one of the most terrifying ideologies in human history. We will learn how a small group of mystics in post-war Munich laid the spiritual foundations of the Third Reich, and how their search for ancient wisdom turned into a justification for genocide. Get ready to immerse yourself in the history of the Thule Society and the mystical roots of Nazism. Dear viewers, if you found this story about the dark side of human beliefs interesting, be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Now tell us honestly in the comments, do you think mystical ideas could really influence the course of history? Or is this just an attempt to find justification for political crimes? Your opinion is very important to us. In 1918, the German Empire lay in ruins. 4 years of bloody war ended in a humiliating defeat that shook the foundations of German society. Kaiser Wilhelm II abdicated the throne, and revolutionary troops marched through the streets of cities. In this chaos, amid the ruins of the old world, new forces were emerging that would lead to an even more terrible catastrophe 2 decades later. Munich, the capital of Bavaria, became the epicenter of political and spiritual upheaval. It was here, in an atmosphere of despair and search for new meaning, that mystical societies emerged, promising the German people a rebirth through a return to their ancient roots. One of the most influential was the Thule Society, an organization that combined occult practices with radical political ideas. The name of the society came from the legendary Thule, a mythical northern land that ancient geographers placed at the edge of the known world. For the founders of the society, Thule symbolized the ancestral homeland of the Aryan race, the place from which the ancestors of the Germanic tribes once came. This geographical mystification became the cornerstone of an ideology that combined archaeological fantasies with racial theory and political ambitions. The founder of the society, Baron Rudolf von Sebottendorf, was not German by origin. This Austrian nobleman, born Adam Alfred Rudolf Glauer, spent his youth traveling through the Ottoman Empire, where he became acquainted with Sufi traditions and Eastern mysticism. Returning to Germany on the eve of the war, he brought with him an eclectic mixture of occult teachings, which he adapted to German nationalist sentiments. The first meetings of the Thule Society were held at the Four Seasons Hotel in Munich. The participants, who included lawyers, journalists, industrialists, and military personnel, discussed not only mystical doctrines but also current political issues. The revolutionary events of 1918–19 prompted the society to intensify its political activities. When the Bavarian Soviet Republic was proclaimed in Munich, the members of Thule sided with the counter-revolution. Among the regular attendees of the meetings was railway mechanic Anton Drexler, who founded the German Workers' Party in January 1919. This small political group, which initially numbered several dozen people, became the seed from which the Nazi Party grew. The connection between the mystical society and the political movement was not accidental. The ideologues of Thule saw the mass party as a tool for realizing their esoteric ideas in reality. Rudolf von Sebottendorf was born in 1864 in the Austrian town of Heiersdorf to a family of a locomotive engineer. The future baron's real name was Adam Alfred Rudolf Glauer. His modest origins did not prevent him from dreaming of great achievements. and the mysterious knowledge of the East from a young age. At the age of 18, he left his family home and set out to conquer the world, starting with studying engineering in Berlin. Fate took the young Glauer to the Ottoman Empire, where he spent more than 20 years of his life. At first, he worked as an engineer on the construction of railways, but gradually he became more and more attracted to the mystical teachings of the East. In Istanbul, he met the family of Baron Heinrich von Sebottendorf, whose widow adopted him in 1902, passing on her noble title. The newly minted baron immersed himself in the study of Sufism, alchemy, and astrology. He studied the works of medieval mystics, practiced meditation, and claimed to have reached high levels of spiritual development. He was particularly interested in theories about ancient civilizations and secret knowledge that were supposedly preserved in the esoteric traditions of the Middle East. In 1908, Sebottendorf returned to Germany, bringing with him a wealth of Eastern wisdom and ambitious plans for the spiritual transformation of the German people. He settled in Munich and began to seek out like-minded people among German intellectuals who were interested in the occult. At that time, there were many mystical circles and secret societies in Germany, but Sebottendorf saw the need to create a new type of organization. In 1917, he acquired the rights to a small occult society called Thule, which had been founded earlier by journalist Walter Neuhaus. Under the Baron's leadership, the organization quickly expanded and took on a political character. Sebottendorf attracted representatives of the Munich elite to the society: industrialists, aristocrats, military officers, and intellectuals. The Baron developed a complex system of initiations and rituals based on his understanding of ancient Germanic mythology and Eastern esotericism. He claimed that the German people were the heirs of an ancient Aryan civilization that once flourished in the northern lands. According to his theory, this civilization possessed advanced spiritual and technological knowledge, but was destroyed as a result of racial mixing and the loss of blood purity. Sebottendorf's teachings combined racist ideas with mystical practices. He preached the need to restore Aryan purity through spiritual purification and the political revival of Germany. These ideas found fertile ground in post-war Germany, where many were looking for explanations for the national catastrophe and a path to revival. Symbolism played a central role in the ideology of the Thule Society. Ancient symbols, which Baron von Sebottendorf and his followers drew from Germanic mythology, became visual embodiments of their racial theory and mystical beliefs. The most important of these symbols was the swastika, a sign that would become an ominous symbol of the Nazi regime a few years later. The swastika has an ancient history, and images of it have been found in archaeological sites of many peoples around the world. In India, it remains a sacred symbol of Hinduism and Buddhism, signifying prosperity and good fortune. However, the ideologues of the Thule Society interpreted the swastika exclusively as an Aryan symbol, supposedly brought by ancient Germanic tribes from their mythical northern homeland. Sebottendorf claimed that the swastika symbolized the movement of the Aryan spirit and the cosmic forces that govern the destinies of races. The right-facing swastika, later used by the Nazis, in his opinion, signified creative power and racial purity. This symbol was intended to remind Germans of their ancient greatness and inspire them to fight for racial rebirth. Runic symbols were another important element of the Thule symbol system. Ancient Germanic runes, once used for writing and magical purposes, were reinterpreted as carriers of secret Aryan knowledge. The rune sig, resembling a lightning bolt, was especially revered, symbolizing the victory and power of the Germanic spirit. Later, the double rune sig would become the emblem of the SS troops. The Society's ideologues developed a complex cosmogonic theory, according to which the history of humanity is a struggle between the forces of light and darkness, the Aryan and Semitic races. In this mythological system, the ancient Germans were the bearers of higher spiritual knowledge, which was lost as a result of racial mixing and the influence of foreign religions. A special place in the Thule system was occupied by the interpretation of Scandinavian mythology. The gods of Asgard were regarded as deified leaders of the Aryan race, and Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, as a prophecy of the coming battle between the Aryans and their racial enemies. This eschatological perspective gave the political struggle a mystical meaning and justified any means to achieve racial superiority. Color symbolism was also important. Red symbolized blood and sacrifice, white symbolized racial purity, and black symbolized the mystical depth and power of the earth. The combination of these colors in the Nazi flag was not accidental, but reflected the deep mythological ideas that had been laid down in the Thule Society. Astrological concepts complemented the symbolic system. Sebottendorf and his followers believed that the fate of nations was determined by the movement of celestial bodies, and that the coming age of Aquarius would bring about the revival of the Aryan race. These ideas would later be reflected in Nazi propaganda about the Thousand-Year Reich. The transformation of the Thule Society from a mystical circle into a political force took place under the influence of the revolutionary events of 1918 to 1919. When the revolution began in Germany in November 1918 and the Bavarian Soviet Republic was proclaimed in Munich, the members of the Thule Society were faced for the first time with the need to move from theoretical discussions to practical action. The Bavarian Revolution was particularly painful for conservative circles in Munich. Many members of the Thule Society saw it not simply as a political upheaval, but as a manifestation of the very racial struggle that their theories spoke of. The fact that there were many Jews among the leaders of the revolution, including Kurt Eisner and Gustav Landauer, reinforced their belief in the correctness of racist concepts. Baron von Sebottendorf organized a secret network of resistance to Soviet power in Bavaria. Members of the Thule Society gathered intelligence, spread anti-Soviet propaganda, and maintained contact with counter-revolutionary forces. Some of them participated in the creation of volunteer corps, Freikorps, which fought against revolutionaries throughout Germany. In April 1919, an event occurred that finally radicalized the Thule Society. The revolutionary authorities arrested 10 members of the organization, including Prince Gustav von Thurn, on taxis, and Countess Hella von Westarp. All those arrested were shot as hostages in response to the government troops' advance on Munich. This tragedy was a turning point in the history of the society. The martyrdom of their comrades convinced the remaining members of the need for active political struggle. Mystical theories no longer seemed sufficient. Concrete political action was required to prevent similar disasters in the future. After the suppression of the Bavarian Soviet Republic in May 1919, the Thule Society began to look for ways to influence political processes. Sebottendorf and his associates realized that aristocratic circles had limited influence on the masses and began to look for ways to create a mass political organization. It was during this period that railway mechanic Anton Drexler came under the influence of the Thule Society. This modest Munich worker, who shared nationalist views, founded the German Workers' Party in January 1919. Initially, it was a tiny group of less than 40 people. But the members of Thule saw it as a potential tool for spreading their ideas among the working class. Financial support for the new party was provided by industrialists who were members of Thule, including Gottfried Feder and Dietrich Eckart. The latter, a poet and journalist, became the ideological mentor of the organization, adapting the mystical theories of Thule to the language of mass propaganda. Dietrich Eckart went down in history as Adolf Hitler's spiritual mentor and one of the main ideologists of the early Nazi movement. This talented poet and journalist, born in 1868 into a wealthy Bavarian family, became a key figure in transforming the mystical ideas of the Thule Society into a populist political program. Eckart received a classical education and studied law in Berlin, but his true passion was literature. He wrote several plays and numerous poems, but did not achieve commercial success. His failures in his literary career, compounded by alcoholism and the squandering of his father's inheritance, made him a bitter critic of modern society. After Germany's defeat in World War I, Eckart found the explanation for all his country's woes in the activities of Jewish conspirators. He began publishing the anti-Semitic newspaper In Good German Style, which quickly gained popularity among Munich nationalists. In his articles, mystical ideas about racial struggle were presented in accessible language that was understandable to a wide audience. Eckart was not only a propagandist, but also a practitioner of the occult. He was fascinated by astrology and spiritualism and considered himself a medium capable of communicating with the spirits of the great Germans of the past. According to him, Goethe's spirit appeared to him several times and dictated poems to him. These mystical experiences strengthened his belief in the special mission of the German people and the need for their spiritual rebirth. In 1919, fate brought Eckart together with the young demagogue Adolf Hitler. They met in September, when Hitler first attended a meeting of the German Workers' Party on behalf of military intelligence. Eckart immediately saw in him a man capable of bringing the ideas of national revival to life. The poet took on the role of Hitler's mentor and patron. He not only financed his political activities, but also introduced him to Munich salons, where the future Führer met influential people. Eckart taught Hitler the art of public speaking, helped him formulate his political program, and even gave him a leather jacket and a dog whip, which became part of his recognizable image. Under Eckart's influence, Hitler's worldview underwent significant changes. Whereas his anti-Semitism had previously been more of an everyday nature, it now took on a mystical tone. Jews came to be perceived not simply as economic competitors or political opponents, but as a cosmic evil threatening the very existence of the Aryan race. Eckart introduced Hitler to the basics of astrology and taught him to use mystical symbolism in political propaganda. He explained the meaning of the swastika as an ancient Aryan symbol and convinced him of the need to use it in party attributes. Many of the ideas that later became the basis of Nazi ideology were first formulated in conversations between teacher and student. Among Hitler's closest associates, Rudolf Hess occupied a special place, a man whose biography was closely intertwined with astrological practices and mystical beliefs. Born in 1894 in Alexandria to a German merchant, Hess was inclined from childhood to romantic dreams and the search for higher meanings. After participating in World War I as a pilot, Hess enrolled at the University of Munich, where he studied history and economics. It was there that he first heard Hitler speak and was captivated by his charisma. From 1920 onwards, Hess became one of the most loyal followers of the future Führer, serving as his personal secretary and confidant. Unlike other Nazi leaders, Hess was openly interested in astrology and the occult sciences. He regularly consulted astrologers, believing that the movement of the planets influenced political events. His wife Ilse shared these interests and often hosted meetings with famous fortune-tellers and mediums in their home. One of Hess's most influential astrological advisors was Karl Ernst Kraft, a Swiss astrologer who had been working in Berlin since 1939. Kraft drew up horoscopes for the Reich's top leaders and even received an official salary from the Ministry of Propaganda. His predictions sometimes influenced important political decisions. Another colorful figure in Hess's entourage was Erich Jan Hannessen, an Austrian clairvoyant and hypnotist who claimed to have the ability to predict the future. Hannessen regularly performed in Berlin theaters, demonstrating his paranormal abilities, and gained fame among the upper echelons of society. Some historians claim that he predicted the Reichstag fire, although there is no reliable evidence of this. The influence of astrologers on Hess was so strong that he sometimes postponed important meetings if the stars were unfavorable. His subordinates were aware of these peculiarities of their boss and tried to take astrological factors into account when planning his work schedule. Some critical decisions in the Deputy Führer's office were made only after consulting with astrologers. The culmination of Hess's mystical pursuits was his mysterious flight to Scotland in May 1941. According to the official version, he decided to hold separate negotiations with Great Britain to conclude peace before attacking the USSR. However, many researchers associate this action with astrological calculations. A few days before the flight, Hess consulted with his astrological advisors, who informed him of the favorable alignment of the planets for important undertakings. Some sources claim that the decision to fly to Scotland was made precisely under the influence of these predictions. After the mission failed, Hitler banned all astrological practices in the Reich and sent many fortune-tellers to concentration camps. Heinrich Himmler, Reichsführer SS and architect of the Holocaust, was also one of the main mystics of the Third Reich. This seemingly unremarkable man with round glasses and a slight build turned the elite SS units into a true mystical order, combining medieval rituals with modern ideology of racial superiority. Born in 1900 into a Catholic Bavarian family, Himmler was fascinated by history and archaeology from childhood. He was particularly attracted to legends about medieval orders of knights, the Templars, Teutonic Knights, and Hospitallers. In their history, he saw an example of how a small group of initiates could change the course of history through a combination of mystical belief and military discipline. After the Nazis came to power, Himmler began to transform the SS from a party guard into an elite organization of a new type. He developed a complex system of initiations, rituals, and ceremonies designed to instill in SS members a sense of racial superiority and mystical destiny. Every SS officer was required to study his family's genealogy and prove his Aryan ancestry back to the 18th century. The center of the SS's mystical activities was Wewelsburg Castle in Westphalia, which Himmler leased from the local authorities in 1934. This medieval triangular castle was rebuilt in accordance with the Reichsführer's occult ideas. A circular hall was created in the North Tower, where secret ceremonies of the SS High Command were held. In the center of the hall was King Arthur's Round Table, which could seat 12 SS leaders, Gruppenführers, symbolically representing the 12 Knights of the Grail. The floor was laid with a mosaic depicting the Black Sun, a mystical symbol that Himmler considered to be an ancient Aryan sign of cosmic energy. Beneath the main hall was a crypt, where it was planned to store urns with the ashes of fallen SS heroes. Himmler saw Wewelsburg not just as headquarters, but as the spiritual center of the future Aryan Empire, which was to spread throughout Europe and beyond. According to his plans, the castle was to become a place of pilgrimage for future generations of SS members. SS rituals included elements borrowed from various mystical traditions. Recruits underwent an initiation ceremony by torchlight, swearing allegiance not only to the Führer, but also to the blood and soil of the German race. SS officers wore rings with the symbol of a dead head and runic signs, which were supposed to protect them in battle and emphasize their belonging to the elite. Particular importance was attached to the celebration of pagan holidays. Instead of Christian celebrations, the SS celebrated the winter and summer solstices, the spring equinox, and other dates associated with the ancient Germanic calendar. These ceremonies were conducted with great pomp and were intended to strengthen the connection between modern Germans and their pagan ancestors. In 1935, a unique organization called Ahnenerbe, Ancestral Heritage, was created within the SS structure. Officially, this research society was engaged in the study of the history, archaeology, and culture of the Germanic peoples, but in reality, it became a center for pseudoscientific research aimed at confirming the racial theories of Nazism. The founder and leader of the Ahnenerbe was Hermann Wirth, a Dutch philologist and historian who claimed to have discovered traces of an ancient Aryan civilization in the runic inscriptions and folk traditions of Northern Europe. Wirth developed a theory that all of humanity's great achievements belong to the Aryan race, which in ancient times possessed advanced spiritual and technical knowledge. With Himmler's support, the Ahnenerbe quickly grew into a large research organization with branches throughout the Reich. It included archaeologists, historians, linguists, anthropologists, and even occultists. Many of them were serious scientists who hoped to use generous funding to conduct real research, but were forced to tailor their conclusions to ideological requirements. One of the most ambitious projects of the Ahnenerbe was archaeological excavations in various parts of Europe. Expeditions were sent to Scandinavia, Iceland, the Balkans, and even Crimea in search of traces of ancient Aryan civilization. Archaeologists hoped to find evidence that Germanic tribes had created all the great cultures of antiquity, from Mycenaean Greece to Celtic Britain. Of particular interest were megalithic monuments such as Stonehenge, Breton dolmens, and Germanic stone circles. Ahnenerbe researchers claimed that these structures were built by the ancient Aryans for astronomical observations and religious ceremonies. They searched for hidden symbols in the arrangement of the stones and tried to decipher the Aryan science of our ancestors. Linguistic research was aimed at finding the proto-language of the Aryan race. Ahnenerbe scientists studied ancient texts, runic inscriptions, and folklore traditions, trying to reconstruct the original Aryan language, from which all Indo-European dialects supposedly originated. This work often led to fantastic conclusions about the connection between the Old Germanic language and Sanskrit, and even the languages of the American Indians. The Ahnenerbe's biological research was particularly sinister. Under the direction of physician August Hirt, experiments were conducted on concentration camp prisoners to study racial differences. These studies had no scientific value, but served as a pseudoscientific justification for genocide. Hirt collected a collection of skulls from Holocaust victims for racial studies. The Ahnenerbe was also involved in the search for ancient magical practices and occult knowledge. Researchers studied medieval alchemical treatises, books on folk magic, and even Tibetan mystical traditions. They hoped to find the lost wisdom of the Aryan ancestors, which could give Germany an advantage in the war. Despite enormous expenditure of funds and effort, the Ahnenerbe did not make a single significant scientific discovery. All of its achievements were either a distortion of facts to fit ideological schemes or outright falsifications. Nevertheless, this organization played an important role in creating a pseudoscientific basis for Nazi ideology. One of the most mysterious episodes in the history of Nazi Germany was the expeditions to Tibet, organized under the patronage of the Ahnenerbe and Heinrich Himmler himself. These trips to the roof of the world officially pursued scientific goals, but were closely linked to the search for the mystical roots of the Aryan race and the establishment of contacts with Tibetan spiritual leaders. The initiator of the Tibetan expeditions was Ernst Schaefer, a young zoologist and researcher who had made several trips to the Himalayas in the 1920s. Schaefer was fascinated not only by biology, but also by Tibetan culture, believing that traces of ancient Aryan traditions had been preserved in this high-altitude country. His ideas attracted the attention of the Ahnenerbe leadership, who saw Tibet as an opportunity to find confirmation of racial theories. The first major expedition led by Schaefer set off for Tibet in 1938. The official goal was to study the flora, fauna, and ethnography of the region. But the expedition members also received secret assignments from the Ahnenerbe. They were to find evidence of the presence of the Aryan race in ancient Tibet and establish contacts with local spiritual leaders. Schaefer's expedition spent almost a year in Tibet, from May 1938 to August 1939. The participants were warmly welcomed by the Tibetan authorities and even received an audience with the young 14th Dalai Lama, who was only 4 years old at the time. The regent of Tibet, Reting Rinpoche, showed interest in the German guests and allowed them to conduct research throughout the country. The expedition's anthropologist Bruno Beger measured the skulls and other physical characteristics of Tibetans in an attempt to find signs of Aryan blood. He made casts of the faces and bodies of hundreds of Tibetans, compiled detailed anthropometric charts, and even made several films about the local population. In his opinion, there were indeed people with Nordic facial features among the Tibetan aristocracy. Zoologist Ernst Krauss studied the fauna of the Himalayas, but was also interested in local legends about the snowman, the Yeti. He collected many stories about encounters with this mysterious creature, and even brought several samples to Germany, pieces of wool and footprints that local residents attributed to the Yeti. Nazi researchers hoped to find evidence of the existence of an ancient Aryan race in the Yeti. The Germans were particularly interested in Tibetan monasteries with their ancient libraries and mystical traditions. Schaefer and his colleagues studied Buddhist texts, looking for references to the northern lands from which the founders of Tibetan civilization supposedly came. They photographed thousands of ancient manuscripts and even obtained permission to take some of the texts to Germany. Tibetan lamas listened with interest to the German stories about ancient Aryan wisdom and even expressed their willingness to cooperate in studying the common roots of both traditions. Some of them agreed to come to Germany to participate in the Ahnenerbe's research. These contacts continued even after the start of World War II. After the expedition returned to Germany, its materials became the basis for new theories about the origin of the Aryan race. Ahnenerbe researchers claim to have found traces of an ancient civilization in Tibet that was created by settlers from the mythical Atlantis or Hyperborea. In their opinion, Tibet's high-altitude location protected this civilization from racial mixing. New expeditions to Tibet were planned, but the outbreak of war prevented them from taking place. Nevertheless, contacts with Tibetan lamas continued through diplomatic channels. There was even a small Tibetan community in Berlin, whose members collaborated with German researchers in the study of Buddhist philosophy and meditation practices. The results of the Tibetan expeditions were used by Nazi propaganda to confirm theories about the antiquity and superiority of the Aryan race. Films and photographs from Tibet were shown in Germany as proof that the ancestors of the Germans once ruled in the most remote corners of the world. Among the many mystical projects of the Third Reich, a special place was given to the search for the Holy Grail and other Christian relics, which Nazi occultists hoped to use to strengthen their power. This search was closely linked to the activities of the Ahnenerbe and was personally supervised by Heinrich Himmler, who saw the possession of sacred artifacts as a source of mystical power. The legend of the Holy Grail, the cup from which Christ drank during the Last Supper and into which his blood was collected after the crucifixion, had inspired European adventurers for centuries. Nazi ideologues reinterpreted this Christian legend in the context of their racial theories, claiming that the Grail was in fact an ancient Aryan symbol that was later appropriated by Christianity. The center of the search for the Grail was Wewelsburg Castle, which Himmler regarded as the future center of the world of the Aryan Empire. According to his plans, the castle was to become the repository for all the sacred relics collected throughout Europe. A special crypt was created in the northern tower of the castle, where it was planned to place the Grail after its discovery. The search was conducted in various parts of Europe. Particular attention was paid to the French region of Languedoc, where the Cathar heresy existed in the Middle Ages. Nazi researchers believed that the Cathars were the keepers of ancient Aryan wisdom, and that their persecution by the Catholic Church was an attempt to destroy true European spirituality. They searched for traces of the Grail in the ruins of Cathar castles, especially in the famous Montségur. Another area of search was Spain, where the Nazis hoped to find relics in monasteries and cathedrals. Of particular interest was the monastery of Montserrat in Catalonia, which medieval legends associated with the Grail. German agents conducted secret investigations there, trying to find hidden chambers with ancient artifacts. In Germany itself, the search focused on castles and monasteries associated with the history of the Teutonic Knights and other medieval orders. Particular attention was paid to Cologne Cathedral, where, according to some legends, the relics of the Magi were kept. Nazi researchers carefully studied the cathedral archives and even conducted excavations in the underground chambers. In addition to the Grail, the Nazis searched for other Christian relics: the Spear of Longinus, with which Christ was pierced on the cross, pieces of the true cross, and the Shroud of Turin. In their view, these artifacts possessed magical powers that could ensure victory in war and the establishment of a 1,000-year Aryan Empire. The most famous episode was the search for the Spear of Longinus in the Hofburg Museum in Vienna. This relic, known as the Spear of Destiny, was said to give its owner power over the world. Hitler had known about it since his youth, when he lived in Vienna, and after the Anschluss of Austria in 1938, he immediately ordered the spear to be transported to Nuremberg. In Nuremberg, the city of party congresses, a special treasury was created to store the relics. In addition to the Vienna spear, it was planned to place all the artifacts found there. Nuremberg was seen as the symbolic center of the revived Holy Roman Empire of the German nation, and the relics were intended to emphasize the continuity between the medieval emperors and the Nazi regime. The search continued even in the final years of the war, when the Reich's resources were extremely limited. Otto Skorzeny and other SS officers were given secret assignments to search for artifacts in occupied countries. These missions were often disguised as official archaeological expeditions or art requisitions. The ritualistic side of Nazi ideology reached its peak in numerous ceremonies and celebrations that were intended to replace Christian traditions and create a new religion of blood and soil. These events combined elements of ancient Germanic paganism with modern mass propaganda, creating a powerful emotional effect among participants and spectators. 4 major holidays tied to the solar cycle took center stage in the Nazi calendar. The winter solstice, December 21st, was celebrated as a festival of the rebirth of the sun and the Aryan spirit. Instead of Christmas trees, huge bonfires were lit, and instead of Christian hymns, ancient Germanic songs about gods and heroes were sung. The spring equinox became a celebration of the awakening of nature and the racial strength of the German people. Young Germans in traditional costumes danced around a May tree decorated with runes and swastikas. These ceremonies were meant to symbolize the connection between modern Aryans and their pagan ancestors. The summer solstice became the main holiday of the SS. At Wewelsburg Castle and other mystical centers, solemn ceremonies were held with the participation of the organization's top leadership. SS members in black uniforms marched by torchlight, took oaths of allegiance, and received new awards. The culmination was the lighting of a huge bonfire, symbolizing the unquenchable spirit of the Aryan race. The autumn equinox was dedicated to the memory of fallen heroes and preparation for the trials of winter. During these days, all German cities held parades with portraits of dead Nazis, whom official propaganda declared martyrs for their faith. The anniversaries of the Munich Putsch of 1923 and other heroic episodes in the party's history were celebrated with particular solemnity. In addition to seasonal holidays, the Nazis created a system of personal rituals that were supposed to accompany a person from birth to death. Instead of Christian baptism, naming ceremonies were held, where babies were blessed with runic symbols and recorded in the books of life of the Aryan race. Wedding ceremonies also took on a pagan character. Newlyweds exchanged vows before an altar with a swastika image, received special wedding rings with runic symbols from SS priests, and were solemnly declared continuers of the Aryan race. These marriages were seen not as a union between two people, but as an act of racial reproduction. Funeral rituals were also revised in accordance with pagan traditions. Instead of Christian burial, cremation was practiced, and urns with ashes were placed in special memorials decorated with ancient Germanic symbols. Speeches were given at the gravesides, proclaiming that the deceased had joined the great assembly of Aryan ancestors and would continue to fight for the race in the afterlife. Initiation ceremonies into various Nazi organizations played a special role. Young people joined the Hitler Youth and the League of German Girls in a solemn atmosphere, swearing allegiance to the Führer and the race. Adults received party cards during mystical rituals, where ancient spells were recited and sacred fires burned. The architectural design of these ceremonies also had a deep symbolic meaning. Huge stadiums and squares created a sense of grandeur and unity. Thousands of torches, banners with swastikas, strict geometric formations, all this was supposed to influence people's subconscious and evoke a sense of belonging to a great power. The influence of astrology on military decision-making in the Third Reich reached its peak during World War II. Although Hitler was publicly skeptical of predictions, many high-ranking Nazis regularly consulted astrologers and made important decisions based on astrological calculations. The most documented case of astrology influencing military strategy was Rudolf Hess's flight to Scotland in May 1941. A few days before his mysterious flight, the Deputy Führer consulted with astrologer Karl Ernst Kraft, who informed him of the favorable alignment of the planets for peace negotiations. Kraft compiled a detailed horoscope indicating that the period from May 10th to 12th would be particularly auspicious for diplomatic initiatives. The astrologer claimed that the conjunction of Jupiter and Mercury in the House of Negotiations created ideal conditions for concluding peace with Great Britain. These predictions apparently played a decisive role in Hess's decision to fly. After Hess's mission failed and he was captured by the British, Hitler flew into a rage and ordered the arrest of all astrologers in the Reich. The operation, codenamed Action Against Astrologers, took place in June 1941. Hundreds of soothsayers, including Kraft himself, were sent to concentration camps. However, after a few months, many of them were secretly released to work for military intelligence. The Ministry of Propaganda, led by Joseph Goebbels, actively used astrological predictions in the war against the Allies. German astrologers compiled false horoscopes, which were dropped into Great Britain using balloons. These predictions foretold the imminent death of Churchill and the inevitable defeat of the British Empire. In response, British intelligence MI6 created its own black astrology service under the leadership of Louis Deveau, a Hungarian astrologer working for the Allies. Deveau studied the astrological preferences of Nazi leaders and compiled counter-propaganda horoscopes, which were secretly distributed in Germany. Astrology played a special role in military planning in the submarine fleet. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of the German submarines, regularly consulted with astrologers when planning operations. Astrological calculations were taken into account when determining the most favorable time for attacks on Allied convoys. Some submarine commanders had personal astrological advisors who drew up horoscopes for each combat mission. These predictions determined not only the time of departure, but also the choice of patrol areas. Statistics show that submarines operating in accordance with astrological recommendations did indeed have slightly higher performance rates. In the final years of the war, as the situation on the front lines became increasingly hopeless, the influence of astrology on decision-making only grew stronger. Hitler and his entourage increasingly turned to mystical practices in search of a miraculous salvation. Astrologers predicted the imminent collapse of the anti-Hitler coalition, the emergence of a new miracle weapon, and the final victory of the Reich. Even the planning of the last defensive operations was carried out with astrological factors in mind. For example, the Ardennes offensive in December 1944 was scheduled for the winter solstice, which astrologers considered particularly favorable for German weapons. Despite initial successes, the operation ended in complete failure. In the secret laboratories and research centers of the Third Reich, projects were developed that combined advanced scientific research with mystical ideas about supernatural forces. These programs, financed with huge sums of money and supervised personally by Himmler, were supposed to give Germany a decisive advantage in the war through the use of occult knowledge. One of the most mysterious projects was the Belenet's Disk program, named after an ancient Slavic god of war. German engineers led by Victor Schauberg worked on creating disc-shaped flying machines that were supposed to use vortex energy, a force supposedly known to ancient Aryan sages. Schauberg, an Austrian forester turned inventor, claimed to have discovered the principles of levitation by studying the movement of trout in mountain streams. According to his theory, properly organized vortex flows could create an anti-gravity effect. SS researchers linked these ideas to ancient German legends about the flying ships of the gods. Prototypes of flying saucers were built in the underground factories of the Junkers concern and other enterprises, which were supposed to revolutionize military aviation. Eyewitnesses reported seeing strange disc-shaped craft silently hovering over the forests of Bavaria and Thuringia. However, none of these projects reached the stage of mass production before the end of the war. At the same time, research was conducted in the field of ice cosmogony, a pseudoscientific theory developed by Austrian engineer Hans Herbiger. According to this concept, the history of the Earth is determined by collisions with ice satellites, and climate change influences the development of races. Hitler personally supported this research, considering it the key to understanding cosmic forces. The Ahnenerbe project studied the possibilities of using Earth rays and geomagnetic fields to create a new type of weapon. German physicists, led by Professor Karl Schumann, conducted experiments with pendulums and dowsing rods, trying to find ways to concentrate Earth energy for military purposes. Particular attention was paid to finding entrances to the legendary underground civilization of Agartha, which, according to Nazi mystics, existed in the bowels of the earth. Expeditions were sent to the caves of the Harz Mountains, the Alps, and other mountainous regions, where they searched for tunnels leading to the underground world. The researchers hoped to find the remains of ancient Aryan technologies there. In Antarctica, the Germans created a secret base called New Swabia, which was officially intended for whaling, but in reality served as a center for searching for entrances to the Hollow Earth. According to the theories of some Nazi scientists, our planet was hollow inside, and its inner surface was inhabited by descendants of the ancient Aryan race. Medical experiments in concentration camps also had a mystical component. SS doctors studied the limits of human endurance, not only for practical military purposes, but also to find evidence of racial superiority. They tried to find special physiological qualities in Aryans that would distinguish them from other races. The Lebensborn program for raising racially pure children also included elements of eugenic experiments aimed at creating a superhuman. Selection was based not only on physical characteristics, but also on supposed mystical qualities, the ability to see the future, telepathy, and other paranormal phenomena. In the final months of the war, when Germany's defeat became apparent, the research took on an increasingly desperate character. Scientists worked on creating psychotronic weapons that would affect the enemy's consciousness, and a climate gun capable of changing the weather on the battlefield. These fantastic projects consumed resources that could have been used to produce real weapons. The collapse of the Third Reich in May 1945 marked the end not only of a political system, but also of the mystical empire that Nazi occultists had attempted to build. The fates of the main ideologists and practitioners of esoteric Nazism varied, but for most of them, Germany's defeat meant the collapse of all hopes for the creation of an Aryan mystical civilization. Heinrich Himmler, the architect of SS mysticism, attempted to switch sides to the Allies in the final days of the war, offering them a separate peace in exchange for retaining power. However, these attempts failed, and on May 23, 1945, the Reichsfuhrer SS committed suicide by biting into a cyanide capsule during interrogation by British officers. Wewelsburg Castle, the spiritual center of the SS, was blown up by retreating SS troops to prevent its capture by the Allies. The mystical hall with the image of the Black Sun was destroyed, and the library of occult literature was burned. Only a small part of the archives was saved by American troops and later used by researchers. Rudolf Hess, who had been in British captivity since 1941, appeared before the Nuremberg tribunal and was sentenced to life imprisonment. In Spandau prison, he continued to believe in the mystical ideas of his youth, refusing to accept defeat as final. Until his death in 1987, he waited for a cosmic revolution that would restore Aryan supremacy. After the war, many Ahnenerbe scientists and researchers managed to conceal their involvement in Nazi projects and continued their scientific careers in West Germany or the United States. Anthropologist Hans F.K. Gunther, who developed racial theories, lived quietly until 1968, working at universities and publishing scientific works. Ernst Schaefer, leader of the Tibetan expeditions, spent several years in Soviet captivity, but was later released and returned to zoological research. He never publicly repented of his collaboration with the Nazis, continuing to claim that his expeditions were purely scientific in nature. Victor Schauberg, inventor of flying saucers, was taken to the United States as part of Operation Paperclip, where he continued to work on vortex engines for the American military. His ideas were not put into practical use, but contributed to the development of UFO theories in post-war America. Astrologer Wilhelm Wolff, who survived the war, wrote memoirs about his work for the Nazis, in which he described in detail the role of the occult in political decision-making. His book, The Zodiac and the Swastika, became one of the first reliable sources of information about the mystical side of the Third Reich. Much of the occult literature and artifacts collected by the Nazis was lost in the chaos of the final days of the war. Many valuable manuscripts were burned during the bombings, and collections of ancient artifacts were looted or destroyed. What was saved fell into the hands of the Allies and remained classified for a long time. Some Nazi mystics managed to flee to South America, where they established small communities that continued to profess racist and occult ideas. In Argentina and Chile, there were groups that preserved SS rituals and believed in the possibility of reviving the Aryan Empire. The collapse of Nazism's mystical project showed the illusory nature of attempts to combine political power with occult practices. The Thousand-Year Reich, which was supposed to last forever, lasted only 12 years, leaving behind only ruins and terrible memories of crimes committed in the name of racial mysticism. The legacy of the Thule Society and the mystical roots of Nazism continue to influence the modern world, manifesting themselves in various forms of neo-Nazism, conspiracy theories, and pseudoscientific concepts. Despite the military defeat of the Third Reich, the ideas that originated in Munich's occult circles in the early 20th century have not disappeared completely and periodically resurface in new forms. Contemporary neo-Nazi groups actively use symbols and rituals developed by the ideologues of the Thule Society and the SS. The swastika, runes, the image of the Black Sun, and other mystical symbols have become an integral part of the attributes of far-right movements around the world. Many of these organizations openly call themselves heirs to the SS traditions and conduct pagan ceremonies modeled on Nazi rituals. In the US and Europe, there are groups that are trying to revive the religion of Wotanism, a modern interpretation of ancient Germanic paganism with a racist twist. These communities perform rituals of worship to the Norse gods, but interpret them exclusively as patrons of the white race. They publish literature that combines archaeological data with racial theories. Conspiracy theories about Nazi occultism have become widespread in popular culture. Books, films, and documentaries regularly revisit themes such as the search for the Holy Grail, secret Nazi bases in Antarctica, and contact with extraterrestrial civilizations. Many of these theories are based on real facts, but greatly exaggerate the scale and effectiveness of the Reich's mystical projects. The internet has become a powerful tool for spreading neo-Nazi and occult ideas. Hundreds of websites offer the true history of the Third Reich, glorifying its mystical achievements and denying its war crimes. Theories that the Nazis possessed secret technologies that were hidden by the victors have become particularly popular. In Russia and Eastern European countries, neo-pagan movements sometimes borrow elements of Nazi symbolism, adapting them to Slavic mythology. These groups claim to be fighting for the revival of ancestral traditions, but in fact, they are reproducing racist schemes developed by the ideologues of the Ahnenerbe. Contemporary esoteric literature also bears traces of the influence of Nazi occultism. Books about the secret teachings of the Aryan race, the search for Shambhala, and contacts with inner Earth civilizations often repeat ideas formulated by German mystics of the 1930s. The authors of these works usually do not mention the Nazi roots of their theories. Academic science today is seriously studying the phenomenon of Nazi occultism as an important component of the ideology of the Third Reich. Historians have gained access to declassified archives and can objectively assess the role of mystical ideas in shaping Nazi policy. These studies show that occultism was not a marginal hobby of individual leaders, but a systemic part of ideology. It is important to understand that the study of Nazi occultism is necessary not to glorify these ideas, but to understand the mechanisms of their impact on the mass consciousness. Only by knowing how mystical concepts were used to justify genocide and aggression can we prevent similar tragedies from happening again in the future. Contemporary democratic societies must remain vigilant against attempts to revive racist ideologies under the guise of spiritual or scientific teachings. The history of the Thule Society shows how quickly marginal mystical groups can become a political force capable of leading to catastrophic consequences for all of humanity.